Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I wanted to talk about the character who's a villain in The Last of Us called David. And it really resonated with me because people, years ago when they talked even more about that game, said I reminded them of Ellie, even though now that I've seen all of the series, I connect more with the mentality of Abby, interestingly. But what I do like about the younger version of Ellie is her strength. And so I do enjoy the character development of Ellie. Now, David in The Last of Us, he's a villain who is also a cannibal, and he has strange desires when it comes to Ellie, and he's a master manipulator. And as she's brave while she's in the holding cell, and she's worried, you can see how necessary it is for young girls who don't have male protection to have a sense of tact, self-assuredness, and survival. Now, it is a video game. However, there are lots of orphans and young women who live in dangerous areas, especially in America, that have to get to school on their own, have to deal with bullies, and have to be around dangerous men. If you look on maps that show sex offenders, you would be shocked. Okay? Everywhere in the world there is evil, and so a woman must, when she is young, understand what kind of planet she lives on, and that she may not be blessed with a dad who protects her. She may not have older brothers or uncles or cousins who even give a damn. So she has to be strong and hold her own as best as she can. And what's interesting is how Ellie fights David, and if things get burnt down and she gets out and reunites with Joel and everything. And Joel's an excellent protector. I've did a video on him the other day, so check that out. I also put this on a playlist, by the way. In case you missed that video, just scroll the playlist and see The Last of Us there. But she still, nonetheless, has been a survivor. And this is what is so touching, is she's had to face different kinds of evil multiple times throughout that game. And David represents, two types of perversion: the eating of flesh and meat, and those who prey on young girls who are vulnerable, alright, for their own twisted desires, and who wouldn't be safe. And if you contrast how Joel takes care of Ellie and how David wants to take care of Ellie, you see a stark contrast. So Joel's like the adopted stepfather who she doesn't have to worry about preying on her sexually, and then you have a guy who wants to marry her who is an insane, cannibalistic, ruthless killer. And that just goes to show that marriage doesn't automatically make a man safe, and just because someone seeks marriage doesn't mean they have good intentions, and they could be quite psychopathic. And there are plenty of Davids in the world, and in the collapsing of empires, those types really come out of the woodwork, because what is The Last of Us? Just a dystopian, anarchical state of being. You're surviving, you have to watch out for other humans just as you do the infected, right? And Ellie has had to survive different kinds of monsters: clickers, bloaters, runners, Fedra agents, and just rogue, corrupt people. But when she runs into David, he's a different kind of enemy, because he tries to say, like, make trades. Oh, give you medicine for the deer meat. Oh, I have you locked in a cage, but if you confide in me, I'll convince the others that, you can come around. So he has a psychological aspect that makes him a new kind of dangerous, and he still wants to kind of harm her, even though they had to help each other survive a horde of clickers and runners and whatnot as they were in that warehouse, like that building, if you recall. So here is this guy who fights side by side with her, and then locks her in a cell and has put her into a corner, essentially, of, if you don't become my wife and submit to me, we might eat you. And that is quite scary, right? When a young woman is faced with not only a degenerate pervert, but a cannibal at that. And she doesn't have a mom and a dad to run to, and the only person who's protecting her at the time isn't there. And so it really can make a mom think, well, essentially made me as a mom think why it's so good to have serious conversations with your daughters about the need to survive and to be wary of men and to be street smart and to understand that evil can have a sweet tongue. Too often times people will say, oh, I'm sincere. Like they take the softer tone of manipulation. In reality, they're dangerous. I see this a lot in the Muslim community, where if the person you're talking to talks softer than you, the people will think you're the arrogant bad one because you're not talking like that. And this is a form of like master manipulation. If you always play the soft one, kind of like how David did with her, gentle, like how you would talk to a spooked horse, it lowers the guard, right? And so if you are more strong, stern, and straightforward, concise, blunt, direct, people see that as off-putting. And then this opens the door to a different type of predator coming in. And David was that fox in the henhouse. He was that type of person who he tried multiple mental strategies to get what he wanted. And he was able to demonstrate also when he was talking to Ellie and she had a firearm pointed at him. He was able to try to get in her head. Meanwhile, he had a firearm the whole time. And then when he uses it, she's like, you had a firearm? Basically. And she sees right there that, oh, maybe he's a good guy then. Like, that might come into your head. Oh, he had the opportunity to lay me out. He didn't. Maybe he is trustworthy. Oh, this guy is fighting side by side with me. Maybe he is a good guy. But then she discovers they're cannibals and she's like, wow. So there's different kinds of evil. And that's another reason why it's important to talk to your children about the different expressions of evil, manipulation, and psychological control and agendas. Because if you want to make a strong person, you have to prepare them for the world that is. It doesn't, and then they don't get crippled by paranoia, they just become more aware. Right? The more an eagle flies, the better it gets. And the more a woman's mind is aware of the dangers of men and their tactics they use, they can become more aware. There's a whole separate category for identifying female predators, but David in the game The Last of Us represents a different kind of predatory men, like that whole sphere. And that's why I consider David to be a well-written villain. And for someone to cannibalize on their fellow human shows, how do you put it? Determination to live, which is pretty scary. So Ellie confronted and was entrapped by a man who will go to the limits, who had the stomach to butcher down a fellow human and consume it multiple times. You see what I'm saying? It's one thing when it's your first time taking down a buck, making a nice venison stew, or, culling your first chicken. That's a big thing, right? You're like, first time you're like, wow, to raise the chicken, break it down, like, all that stuff. For the first time as a woman, you have to open up everything and be like, put your hand in there, right? You're like, oh, this is gross. But darn do I love chicken nuggets. You get tougher. Your stomach gets stronger. Just like if you're out, you get a nice deer. You take the throat, do the halal method, hang it upside down, all the good stuff. The bucket's full of guts. As a woman, that used to be very common. And those women had a stronger stomach for what had to be done. Doctors have a strong sense of stomach as well. Now when it comes to humans, there's a threshold there, right? Can't eat humans, that's haram. To do that, you've crossed the Rubicon. You've entered into the strange abyss of darkness. And someone who has participated in that and exists in that realm is going to have a different spiritual energy. So David was like a certain type of wicked villain who still had the ability to come off as nice, even though they crossed the Rubicon of human decency, and their soul has been tainted by the consumption of their fellows. Ellie had to be around that, feel it, take that onto the real world, how our daughters will encounter formidable male enemies. And Ellie did not have Joel there at that exact moment to save her. Another example of when you're alone as a woman, you have to be smart. You have to know how to get out of it. You have to maintain composure, maintain control, strategize, all that. And it's remarkable when you see women who survive violent men. And this is incumbent upon us to educate our daughters in the best way, to have serious conversations about what lies out there. I've watched some true crime stories with my daughter so that she can see, what people are capable of, and we talk about it in an intelligent way. And when I was younger, I watched horror movies with my grandma, and that did make me smarter. That did. Now, some people would say that's haram because it has violence and kids don't need to see that. But there are schools now being shot up. There's drug dealers capping people. There's so much wickedness and instability and danger that if you keep them so sheltered from what is, then you've actually taken out their claws. You've cut the wings off of them. You haven't really prepared them. It doesn't mean you shock them and make them morbid and macabre. Rather, there's a degree, there's a method, there's a process, right? You have to make them strong. And I think it's very important when your child shows signs of mental maturity. They've seen a pet die, they've seen roadkill, you've had discussions about death, you've had a funeral, right? You know what I mean? Stuff like that. A classmate committed a crime. Like, there's modes where it's time to have the conversation about what Earth is. And David is the character that all of us mothers would fear if they got around our daughters, right? And we would want our daughters to be able to navigate as best as they can in a world like that. But the truth is also that there's lots of Davids, and David wasn't just a small thing. What makes him a scary villain is that when the government shuts down, when there isn't as much, like, you can't call 911, when men are allowed to do as they will without the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can commit atrocities quite easily. Same as women, But again, we're focusing on the villain David. And so David reminds us that some people really are barely holding on to acting good because the law is there. And so it's important for people who live in a safe community to understand that peace is not permanent. You are not owed peace. You will be tested, all of us, and you want to pass those tests, and you want to be prepared and smart. And so, having serious conversations with your daughters about the darkness that lies in the hearts of some men is important. And David is like a shining example of that. And I watched that scene, like me and my eldest have been watching The Last of Us together, discussing it, right? And she's of age. And I find that to be educational. You know, there's a mode. And more mentally ill people are out there. And the prisons are getting extensively full, and they're churning out people to go back into the streets. Some of those people don't know how to operate in the real world anymore. And to them, they are a David. And Ted Bundy was a David. John Wayne Gacy was a David. Ed Gein was a David. It happens. It happens. Further, David was a cannibal, right? What have we been seeing in so many musicians' artwork is this sort of vampiristic fetish. Whole nother conversation, but vampire drinks the blood of fellow humans. It's a whole folklore, mythos, and symbology you can break down about vampires. But vampires prey upon the innocent, right? Plenty of movies have been done about that. One can ask themselves, why is that something that shocks the humans so badly? It's because there's certain levels of darkness that exist within humans, and you have to be prepared to be brave and courageous when faced with such a wicked being. And David was a wicked being, and he had the skills to navigate and dance that fine line to kind of bring you more in, right? It's very interesting to look at and think about. It's a rainy day, so it's time to do some introspection. Let me know what you think, what you observed as well about the character David from The Last of Us. And maybe you noticed something I didn't, but it is fun to examine such a well-written character. By the way, if you'd like to join my blog and help me to fundraise to get a panel and a book holder that I put on my community tab, that'd be great. I post quite a lot on there and have a wide range of topics that you can read about on the blog as well. I'm not monetized, so it supports both this channel and my second channel, Bibliophile Hermit, as well. And I'm not monetized on Instagram, so all the recipes that I post on there and the poetry and the motivational stuff that helps you and inspires you, helps you to think about something different, right? If you feel thankful for that, or you like it and you want to tip your neighborhood philosopher, go ahead and do that. Take care, fam, and watch out for Davids.